Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleague, good afternoon. Greetings from Dublin. I am Massimiliano Mascherini. I'm the head of the social policy unit at Eurofound. And thanks a lot for your invitation. And I'm here today to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on women and the labor market inequality. First of all, the COVID-19 crisis, actually, this is how I see it, like Kerberos, the three-headed hound that was the guardian of the hate. And the reason why I see it like that is that 1 year ago, we thought that the COVID-19 crisis was just a temporary thing. On the other hand, it was here to stay. And it became an health crisis, but then it also became an economic and a social crisis. And actually, like a modern Kerberos, the crisis is affecting the various demographic groups in our society very differently. Coronavirus is an age-specific illness that hits more older people than young people. However, young people, younger generations, and women are, on the other hand, much more exposed to the older population, to the wider consequences of restrictive measures that has been implemented by the governments in an attempt to control the virus. Now, what I'm presenting today is mainly based on the COVID-19 survey that we fielded at Eurofound in April 2020, in July 2020, as well as in March 2021. And the aim of our survey was and is to monitor the social and economic impact of the crisis on Europeans. As a result of our survey, we saw that Europe was hit very, very hard by the crisis, not just in terms of health, but especially in terms of social dimension. So we saw that we had high levels of loneliness and depression, coupled by low levels of optimism due to the lockdown measures and the crisis. The crisis had a huge economic impact with a large share of respondents that claim to have lost their job and a dramatic decrease, especially in the first part of the crisis, of the working time of many. We also saw an increase in telework that allowed to save several jobs, but also that put a strain among those workers, especially women that has children. And finally, there were deep concern about financial and labor market future with a lot of insecurities. But we found a very positive effect of the support measures implemented by member states in order to smooth the economic and social impact of the crisis. And these support measures had a very important role in trust in our institution during these very challenging times. However, the various groups were affected very differently by the COVID-19 crisis. And women, especially, has been those who are being hit hard by the COVID-19 crisis, and especially young women with young children. And we'll see in the rest of my presentation why. First of all, the problem of labor market participation of women is not new. I mean, it's not due to the role to the COVID-19 crisis that we have such differences in labor market participation. However, in Europe, we observed a traditional trend in the decrease of the gender employment gap with an increase of labor market participation of women. These positive trends, however, slow down since 2015. And since 2015 and then the following years that were accompanied by the first recovery, the gender employment gap was more or less stagnating at the 11.5%. This is the difference between the employment rate of women and the employment rate of men. The problem of the lower labor market participation of women is a problem not just for women, but also for the society as a whole. In fact, in our recent work, we estimated the cost of the gender employment gap. So how much basically our society are losing in economic terms by having a lower share of women that are working in comparison to men. in terms of foregone earnings, unpaid taxes, and so on. And so we estimated that the cost of the gender employment gap in Europe was in 2018 equal to 320 billions of euro. This corresponds to 2.37% of the European Union GDP. So labor market participation of women is a big problem. The lack of equality in labor market participation of women is a big problem, not just for women, but also for the society as a whole. So in these circumstances, the COVID arrived, and the short-term impact of COVID on women and their labor participation has been detrimental. The measure taken by governments to control the spread of the virus exacerbated gender divides in employment, in domestic labor and financial security, all unfortunately to the disadvantage of women. With the closure of schools, actually, work-life conflicts of women with young children escalated, and often the mothers of the young children were those to bear the brunt of the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Eurostat monthly unemployment data shows that while male unemployment rate increased from 6.2 to 7.1 during the period of February 2020, February 2021, the increase among women was slightly greater. It was of 1% from 6.9 to 7.9%. Why is that actually? We know that the impact of the 2008 crisis was mainly on men, and the first impact of the COVID-19 crisis seems to be more on women. The reasons actually are, among others, are the following. The sectors that are hit by the restrictive measures like traveling, like hospitality, like retails, are those where women are more present. So they are over represented in these sectors. So they are those who are suffering the most by the closure of these sectors. On the other hand, with the exclusion, of course, of healthcare, men are those who are more involved in essential works that are those actually that were more secure in the first part of the crisis. And then the type of contracts of women. Women participate in the labor market more than men in part-time contracts and temporary contracts. And so these made them more vulnerable in terms of the first economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Furthermore, the teleworkability. Women actually work in sectors that are less teleworkable than the one on men. And then, of course, there are difficulties in managing work-life balance. With the closure of schools, women often had to take additional responsibilities on the education of their children, and this brought to the surge of work-life conflicts. So all these actually put at risk the decrease of inequalities in the labor market, as we recorded during the past year. And of course, these open boxes of problems for the future, as well as, for example, the implications of these in pensions for women. What about their pensions if they will stop to work for this problem? Now, the surge of telework was the first phenomenon that accompanied the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the labor market. As we can see here, in April 2020, so 1 month after the beginning of the crisis, around the 36% of Europeans had started suddenly to work from home. This share was higher at European level for women, around 38%, than men, that was around 34%. In Slovenia, actually, this was the reverse. It was around 23% the share of people that started to work from home in the first part of the crisis, and men were started more than women to work from home. However, after 6 months, actually, and this is for summer 2020 and not for April, telework actually become the norm, and a lot of people actually wanted to work from home more than before after the pandemic. So what we saw is that 65% of Europeans would like to keep working at least once a month from home after the pandemic, and this share is higher for female 68% than for men. And these are important findings because it shows that telework was appreciated by women that were a population that was doing less telework before. However, this surge of telework actually, and especially with the closure of schools, create problems on young mothers with children. And what we can see here, these are the usual 5 indicators indicating the work-life conflicts, reveals that work-life conflicts, the conflicts between work and the home life are on rise, and these are on rise more on the shoulder of women. In fact, if we see the last 2 indicators, the harder to concentrate on job because of family, and the family prevents giving time for job, during the periods of the closure of schools, women reported these 2 problems 3 and 4 times more than men. These are huge differences and make up and have to make us to reflect on the uneven allocation of unpaid unpaid care activities on men and women. And in fact, here in the next slide, here we see the division of unpaid work between men and women in summer 2020 during the pandemic crisis. And what we saw, for example, if we highlight the population of those with the children, we see a huge difference. It's the largest difference recorded among the different items. In fact, women were spending 23 hours per week in doing housework against 15 of men with the same situation of young children, and especially women were spending more than 60 hours a week for taking care of children against almost half, 35 hours a week, the one of men with the children of the same age. Clearly here there has been a surge in hours spent to caring children in comparison to previous surveys that were carried out, and this is of course due to the closure of schools that then left children at home, and so women that had to really extend themselves in order to take care of children while also working. These had reflections on mental well-being of women and men, of course. But what we can see here that if you see these 3 indicators of tension, loneliness, and depression, what we see is that women with children record the highest share of persons declaring that they were tense during the period of the survey. 23% for women with young children against the 19% of men with young children, and of those that feeling depressed, 14% of women and young children felt depressed against the 9% of men. So women actually overperform men in both those indicators, regardless they have having children or not. On the other hand, feeling loneliness, men without children felt more lonely, 18%, than women without children, 16%. But it is more striking to see that 14% of women with the children still feel lonely, against only the 6% of men. And this may reflect actually the lack of support within the family that make women to feel even more lonely, also within the family. Finally, Labor market participation is important for women because it provides them financial independence. And with financial independence, they are full children, they are full citizens, and then can decide to make every choice they want. What we see here is that in green you can say the share of citizens, women and men, that declare to have no savings to go on for 3 months in case they stop working. Against in blue are those who have savings for 12 months or more, so it's the opposite situation. Those who are more privileged in blue and those who are more vulnerable from a financial perspective in green. What we see is that among people with children, 42% of women declare to do not have savings against the 32% of men. Conversely, only 5% of women declare to have savings for more than 12 months against the double, 9% of men. So these actually really highlight the importance of safeguarding labor market participation of women in the aftermath and during the COVID-19 crisis in order to ensure financial security of all children, especially not just for the present, but also for the future. For when the moment of pension will arrive, it is important that women have accumulated their rights during their life with a strong labor market participation, as well as to have secure savings for facing the pension time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the conclusion. I said at the beginning that the COVID-19 crisis was like Kerberos, the three-headed hound that was the guard of the Hades in the Greek mythology. From the Greek mythology, we know that the Kerberos was defeated by Heracles. And how Heracles defeated Kerberos, as we can see here. He took it from his throat, actually. So not fighting one face at a time, but fighting all the three faces at once. In fact, actually, while the COVID-19 crisis had a dramatic toll in terms of life lost, especially among young people, the restrictive measures put in place to control the pandemic had a huge economic and social impact of the crisis among women and among young people. These create questions over the future labor market participation as well as over their pensions and what actually and indicates the need of an important policy initiatives in order to protect and safeguard labor market participation of women for the present as well as for the future implications that this can have for their pension. So governments should act as a modern Heracles, actually, and fighting the crisis with an holistic approach and thinking to all the three phases of the crisis, the health, the social, and the economic, as well as thinking to the long-term implications of the choices that are made during this time for the future of all our citizens. This is my presentation. Thanks a lot, and ladies and gentlemen, again, my greetings from Dublin.